Joining us on the program now from Family First, Simon O'Connor. Kia ora. Thanks for your time today.
Oh, always a pleasure. So I'm just always checking that my mic's on. It's one of my great failings. But no, thanks for the shout out. The forum sold out last year and the year before. So, get in quick. We'd love to have people there.
Hey, I just wanted to drill down a little bit on the theme today, if we can, because courage at a cultural tipping point. I mean, great punchy theme, etc. But are we at a cultural tipping point? And which way is it going to tip, Simon? Should we be optimistic or fearful in this regard? What's behind the headline?
Well, Bob, of course, Bob McCoskrie is brilliant at the snappy alliterative headline. He loves that stuff. I think it's a twofold, really. It's a bit of a double entendre. There is a tipping or a pushing back against a lot of the progressive agendas that we can think of at the moment. So obviously around a lot of the gender ideology, trans ideology, for example. Even in the space about life, particularly if you're looking in America, there is a tipping point. It's actually returning to what, as a conservative, I think is better. But at the same time, and while I use the term a double entendre, there's also a bit of a tipping point to the other way. The progressive side, those who push identity politics, cultural Marxism and so forth, they are pushing and fighting back very hard.
So,
and ultimately,
yeah. So a cultural tipping point that could go either way at this point. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. That's certainly my take. I think there's some encouraging signs that humanity, particularly in the West, is returning towards normality. Again, you are seeing, particularly in that gender ideology space, pushback in the United States, in the UK, in the Nordic countries, and other places. Not so much here in New Zealand yet, but there's encouraging signs.
What's some of the reasons to be optimistic then? What are some of the things that you're seeing internationally that makes you think that it might be tipping from your view in a positive direction?
In the positive way, well, one example's UN or United Nations report that came out by one of their special rapporteurs. I think her name, if I say it correctly, is Reem Assalam. And basically, she's the special rapporteur. I have to read it because it's quite long. She's basically in charge of women and girls issues.
Yep.
And she just put out a new report recently, which twofold, Andrew. One said, look, actually, the gender ideology, particularly directed at children, is wrong. It's actually a violence against girls in particular. And the second was saying we have to stop all this inclusive language nonsense. She didn't quite write it like that, but she's saying, you know what, terms like women, girls, mother, pregnant women, these are biologically grounded realities, and it needs to be celebrated and reflected in law. So yeah, it was twofold: inclusive language, and gender ideology on children. So I can elaborate on that if you need, but it was a fascinating report.
Well, I mean, that is fascinating even at the higher level, because honestly, even a couple of years ago, you would have lost your job in some places for making those sorts of statements. And I, for one, very surprised that this is coming out of the UN, which isn't exactly known for its conservative values. Having said that, though, it's one person within the UN, which is a multifaceted organisation. I'm sure there's different views and opinions in the UN on this issue.
Oh, absolutely. As they say, she's a special rapporteur for violence against women and girls. That's her particular responsibility. There'll be other rapporteurs who have, different titles and different views. But I think what you said at the start of this little piece was correct, that a few years ago, there would be none of this discussed. And in fact, now it is being. I think that's why I'm more optimistic than not. People are speaking now into this debate. They're not afraid to confront those who will often attack and abuse them. In fact, she's quite clear in her report that actually there's a high level of abuse towards biological women or anyone who criticizes gender identity. And so she calls that out. And this is not something which has happened for a while, that there is that pushback, there is that courage which is needed.
There's a difference, I suppose, between an individual within the UN writing a report, and hey, good on her for her courage, but there's a difference between that and actual policy at a local level, at a government level, or in terms of legislation and how that is enacted. Are there positive signs in this space as well, Simon?
Not in New Zealand, I'm sad to say. We are very much behind the eight ball. So in the United Kingdom, they had the likes of the Cass report, and so that stopped a lot of the gender nonsense. Again, particularly the treatment, the medical treatment of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and ultimately, if you wanted to use the ethical term, mutilations
Yeah.
of children. It's been stopped. Nordic countries, other places, certainly in the United States. In fact, there's just been a few rulings from the Supreme Court. But in New Zealand, no. There's reviews and discussions, but there's no movement for change. In fact, our Ministry of Health continues to promote gender transitioning to children when it is bleedingly obvious that children cannot consent to this. And that's again something the UN report stresses. Most people affected are young girls,
Yeah.
often autistic, and they're the ones being pushed into these treatments. So the UN's echoing what most experts are saying, certainly what Family First has been advocating for. And yet here in New Zealand, the ministers responsible and the ministry sit on their hands.
There has been a significant regime change in the United States and a significant pendulum swing, perhaps more so than we have seen in the rest of the world. And there's a reasonable amount of pushback on that as well. But in the highest court in the land in the US, a series of quite remarkable decisions recently that indicate the swing.
They do. And in some ways, I think it's probably twofold. One is the pendulum had swung way too far out into the progressive side, and so it's sort of now coming back towards the conservative side. And the second part, of course, is you've had a number of more conservative-leaning judges appointed to the court. But in no particular order, the court has said that actually Texas, the state of Texas, is allowed to ban under 18-year-olds accessing pornography. I think in South Carolina, the Supreme Court has said it's all right for that state to defund Planned Parenthood. They're not obligated to fund there. Another state has just said actually it's perfectly fine to protect. I think it was Tennessee. They're allowed to protect minors around gender transitioning. They can stop them, particularly having the medical treatment, all those mutilations. And another state, and I've forgotten which one it is, says it's actually okay for parents to not allow their children to go to basically schools with LGBTQI indoctrination. So I suppose overall it's rebalancing the freedoms and rights to be able to do, say, and choose things with responsibility of parents to their children.
Now, this is the Supreme Court, which does have a significant power in the United States. As you mentioned, there's a political aspect. There's some recent appointments there, and that could change as new judges are appointed in the future. Just wanting to get your take, though, on how this will be interpreted, because it's whilst it's the highest court, it's not the only court in the land. There will, I'm sure, in these cases be pushback to some of this, or is it, well, if the Supreme Court rules it, then you can't fight it?
It's pretty much the latter. The Supreme Court, I mean, there's courts for all sorts of layers of courts in the United States. I find it very confusing, but the Supreme Court is, as the name suggests. So when it makes a ruling, it's binding, and you can't challenge it, certainly not directly.
Yep.
So yeah, this is a major course change and corrections. It will have quite a series of precedents now across the country. But activists from both sides will continue to agitate. They'll try to find, if you will, a new legal angle to come in on. But these are, as I say, significant wins. And my take as a non-lawyer, I better stress, is very much trying to protect the First Amendment, still to say, yep, people are free to make decisions and say things. But when it comes to children, there is a need to protect and to guide. And that's sort of how I look at a lot of what's coming out of the Supreme Court at the moment.
So a bit of a pendulum swing, and as we said at the beginning, a bit of a tipping point on what's happening there in a positive way. Do you think it is inevitable that New Zealand will catch up eventually, that we'll start to see some of that enacted in policy and practice in New Zealand in the next few years, or am I being too optimistic?
No, I think it will. I mean, I love this country. I have to say that first and foremost. But I think at times we are often behind the eight ball with social and cultural and political changes around the world. And again, if we look at this what they wrongly call gender affirming care, most of our allied countries are changing we're not.
Yeah.
We're laggards. But we eventually get there, and the pressure builds. And partly it's New Zealanders, all of us, including your listeners, who are looking around the world and reading reports from around the world and going, oh, they've changed. Why haven't we? But
Yeah.
we're often slow.
Is it a little bit
God
like
bless this country.
Is it a little bit like the Supreme Court, actually? Because, we've had a change of government here in New Zealand. Some of the policies have been reversed. However, the decision makers in the civil service and in the government departments, in a lot of cases, those people haven't changed. And so even though government policy may have changed, some of these sort of locked-in ideological theories are yet to budge.
I think that's a big part of it, but it's always twofold. It's the leadership, and that's what you need, that courage and leadership for people to say, actually, we are going to make this change. And I'm directing that towards government ministers. But you're also right. A lot of the civil servants, the bureaucrats driving this policy are deeply committed to these, progressive causes and ideas. And I've often said when I was in Parliament, trying to change policy is like trying to turn a super tanker.
Yeah.
It takes a long time. But I've been in politics long enough to know that if a minister has the courage to say, we're not doing this, or we are going to do that, they are able to override those civil servants. And when it comes to the likes of protecting our young one from this harmful gender ideology, we need courageous leadership from government ministers to say, we're changing this. We're following the research and the science.
And hey, not just courage, of course, for our politicians and leaders, but courage for all of us at what is perhaps a cultural tipping point here in New Zealand as well. That is also the theme of the New Zealand Forum on the Family. Further details available at familyfirst.org.nz. Simon, thanks for potentially some good news, and thanks for joining us today.
A pleasure.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.